Good evening, everybody. My name is Rod Escaola, and I'm a condominium lawyer with Gowling WLG. And I'd like to welcome you to our Condovirus episode 8. After last week's long and windy road, today's episode is the light at the end of the tunnel. So I want to first start the episode by wishing a very happy birthday to two very good friends at home, two condo misfits, just like everybody else on the line. Janine and Eric, I know they're watching because they can't go out. That's why they're watching on their birthday. I know it's a big number for one of you, but Eric, your secret's safe with me. Now, joining us, for those of you who are joining us tonight for the first time, we've been holding these on a weekly basis. We're at episode 8, as I said, and what we do week after week, we try to give you real practical answers to the questions you didn't even know you had. The situation changes. Even this afternoon, there was more new information for us to try to absorb. And also every week we get tons of questions from our viewers, and we love it. Keep sending them. We build our agenda on those. And so what we do to try to answer your questions is I invite key industry experts, and week after week, they're generous enough, or maybe they're bamboozled into joining us. They think maybe that there's a door prize. There isn't. Sorry, folks. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go around the table and I'll introduce them to you. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to also show all of the panelists here. So let me go around the table and introduce our players. Now, from Adams Miles LLP, the man with a plan, Brian Antman. Good evening, Brian.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon. From Wilson Blanchard Management, the godmother of condo management, Sandy Olds. Hi, Sandy.
Good afternoon.
Another extraordinary manager, the Mary Poppins of condo management, Catherine Gow. Catherine, before the end of the seminar, I'll ask you to come up with a Mary Poppins saying. So you have about an hour. They say that not all heroes wear capes. She's the living proof of this. Leading the Avengers at Lash Condo Law, we have with us tonight Denise Lash. Hi, Denise.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
And we have with us for the longest time our regular condo twins. The first one to sport a beard before COVID beards were a thing. Barbe Bleu himself, Graham McPherson. Hi, Graham.
We're the trendsetter.
That's right, the trendsetter. Speaking of beards, our litigation Viking, David Plotkins. Hi, David.
Good evening. I had to buy myself a beard grooming kit for the first time.
You'll have to share tips. Now, with his arrival on our panel, we went from condo twins to condo musketeers. Good evening, Josh Milgram.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Rod.
Our safety and security expert, our own agent 007, Jason Reed. Hi, Jason.
Good evening, Rod. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening. And from Keller Engineering, we have our eager beaver, Justin Tudor. Hi, Justin.
Hey, Rod.
Let me see if I can put the screen now back on. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do two things at once. Tell me if it's there. Okay, so this past week we've received hundreds of questions from all of our viewers. We'll do our very best to try to answer them as much as possible. We'll do something a bit different this week. We have David and Graham looking at the chat channel, and they'll try to bring some questions out, and we'll try to answer them live as we go, as much as possible. And what else we got here? Today's episode is about reopening condo land. Now, don't get excited, don't get carried away. We're not saying to go ahead and reopen it now. We're saying that you need to prepare now for the eventual reopening of condo land, whenever that's going to happen. Closing down, believe it or not, was the easy part. Reopening it in an orderly and safe fashion is going to be far more difficult. You're going to be under tremendous pressure from the owners who will want to have their amenities reopen. But you need to consider things, different factors, there's different considerations that go into the equation, because you need to do this safely, as I said, and in an orderly fashion. It needs to make sense for your constituents, for the corporation, for your community. That's what we're going to focus on today. Before I dive in, my disclaimer, as we do every week, please keep in mind that whenever we refer to legislation, we refer to Ontario legislation. Keep in mind that the information we provide you today is, to the best of our ability, accurate as of the date of this broadcast, which is May 6th, and the situation changing every day. You'll need to this information may become stale fairly quickly. Most importantly, the information we provide you tonight is of a general nature. It's for general use. It may not necessarily apply to you. It may not necessarily answer your specific situation. It's important that you go out there and seek professional advice tailored to your very specific situation to get a solution that works for you. And finally, this session is being recorded. The bonus behind that is that we upload it on our condoadvisor.ca website. Top right, there's a webinar tab. You can click on that. You can see past webinars. Don't ask me how long it will take me to post it up. It usually takes a couple of days. And in a couple of days, you'll have it there. We also post the chat now because a lot of people have been asking for the chat. And so we also post the exchanges. We've changed the order also. We are going to start, well, apparently, I'm not sure if we're going to start with that. We're going to start with you, Graham. Maybe you can walk us through the latest emergency orders and what has been adopted on Monday and what has been adopted today at 1. Can you help us make some sense of that?
Yeah, certainly. And this question actually came up in chat just now, was that the emergency order with respect to the essential businesses and many of the various orders that have been made under the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act were originally set to expire today. But an order in council has been made extending those until May 19th for now. And then in terms of other updates we've received from the provincial government, as of Monday at 12:01 sharp, certain businesses became open again. We've underlined the ones that may have an effect in condo land, perhaps. I mean, one in particular, it starts with an L. It's a word that has found its way into several of our webinars, the old landscaping. It's now official that landscaping businesses are permitted to open their operations.
Okay, wait a second.
You heard me.
Did you just say that landscaping is now allowed in Ontario?
It is now allowed in Ontario as of May 4th at 12:01 a.m.
So I'm not one to brag, but if it is now allowed, it means that it was not allowed before, which means that this panel was right all along. Anyways, I just wanted to say that. Go on, Graham.
Rod, ever not one to brag. So we're also seeing that some additional essential construction projects, including site preparation, excavation, and servicing for residential developments are allowed open. And, while this is separate and apart from condo-related stuff, if you wanted to go to the car wash or buy a begonia at the nursery, you can now do that as well. Golf courses and marinas are also opening, but not to the public, just for the purposes of preparing for the upcoming season. So maybe a light at the end of the tunnel. We're going to have to keep monitoring the situation.
Okay. Well, maybe we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel quite yet, Graham, but we see the tunnel, so we're moving forward. That's great. What about what happened today?
So today at 1 p.m., the Office of the Premier made an announcement that they were planning on several more businesses opening next week. So garden centers and nurseries are going to be doors open. You can come in the same way that we can go into the grocery stores right now. Similarly with hardware stores and safety supply stores. That's going to be in effect on next Monday and then next Tuesday. And then on May 11th, retail stores with street entrances are going to be allowing curbside pickup and delivery. And also, we're going to be seeing an expansion again of the essential construction that's allowed. And so that's going to include below-grade multi-unit residential construction projects that can now begin, and existing above-grade projects can continue. We don't have any more clarity on it than that right now. So we are going to have to watch and see what the actual order in council that comes down says in terms of text.
Okay, maybe we can ask Justin later on when we get to him. Maybe he's got some insight on this. Anything else, Graham?
Just something to keep in mind with respect to all of these openings, and especially if we are going to see more openings happening. It's important to remember that even if the province says it's okay to do X, Y, or Z, the condominium corporations are still able to be more restrictive. So it's just worth keeping in mind for directors out there that if you face pressure from owners to open amenities, because if the government says a gym is allowed, then it's allowed. Condominiums are still entitled to open the amenities at a rate that works for them based on their circumstances, and they don't have to exactly open at the same rate that the provincial government is opening amenities in the public.
Okay. And maybe on that slide, I saw a question on the chat about what is included in landscaping. I just can't shake off this topic, landscaping. And so we don't have a lot of guidance on that, whether or not landscaping actually includes softscape or whether it includes hardscape, and to what extent it includes hardscape. And so in my view, I don't imagine that the landscaping permission now actually authorizes or allows a very sort of substantial hardscape work, installing or building, supporting walls or cement planters. We don't know that, but I have a feeling that that kind of work falls more into the construction side of these of the orders in council. That's pretty much the extent of what we know for now, but it's a bit of a touch and go to answer the question on chat. David, I'm going to turn to you now. What I'm going to ask you is whether you can walk us through the province's reopening framework.
For sure. So we touched on this a little bit last week, and I will go in a little more detail now. Sorry if I'm having some audio issues, but hopefully you're able to hear me okay.
Yeah.
So the province has set out a 3-stage process. These stages don't have express time frames. They're suggesting about 2 to 4 weeks per stage. The suggestion is the first stage, on the advice of the public health authorities, they would be opening up certain workplaces, allowing for some small gatherings. And maybe for us, what that means in condo world is in-person board meetings, perhaps. Stage 2 is opening up more workplaces and more outdoor spaces, allowing some larger gatherings. Maybe that means some smaller AGMs. And then in the third stage, further relaxing the restrictions. And then we'll have to see at that point. I mean, of course, this is all speculation about what's going to remain in our lives from the move we've made towards some virtual and hybrid type meetings, and what's going to go back to what was the old normal.
Right. And maybe under stage 2, the opening of outdoor spaces, I think that maybe they'll be relaxing some of the parks or the play structures that exist in certain condominiums. We don't know that, but we could see that probably falling into that category. So there's really 3 stages that I see here, from a more restrictive one at stage 1 all the way to going back to Woodstock at stage 3, where hopefully, well, I don't know if we'll be back to that normal, but well, I'm not sure that was ever normal. But so that's the framework, but we don't have any dates, David, do we?
No dates. 2
Okay.
to 4 week approximations, and we don't really know when each stage starts or ends.
Right. And so that brings me to the next topic, and I think, and Graham actually touched upon it, this is the key message for you today. Sure, watching what the province does is going to give us all a very clear direction and some clues as to what can be reopened and when to reopen things. But it's important for all condo corps out there to remember that ultimately the decision to reopen an amenity and to provide a service, ultimately that decision will rest solely with every condominium corporation out there. The province's decision to reopen certain businesses is motivated by other factors and considerations, which don't necessarily apply to the condominium world. For instance, we're not concerned about relaunching the economy. I mean, it's a laudable consideration to have, but that's not one that is really relevant to condominiums. The fact that the province, for instance, reopens gyms or fitness centers does not mean that you have to reopen yours at the same time. You should reopen yours when it's safe for you to do it, when you have the resources to keep it operating, when you're able to meet all of your other requirements and obligations. Remember that condo corps can always be more restrictive, but not more permissive than the province. So you can't reopen it before the province authorizes you to do it, but you can certainly delay the opening until you're prepared to do it. That's at least how I would approach it. So you'll have to ask yourself really two questions. Is it legal at this point in time for me to insert the activity, have an AGM, reopen the gym, whatnot? Is it legal? Is it permissible? And then the next question, is it safe to do it? Is it wise to do it? And every condo corporation will be different. It's going to vary depending on the demographics of your condominium. It's going to vary depending on the setup of your condo corporation. Each condo corporation presents different risks, different vulnerability. How big is your exercise room? How many machines do you have in there? What's the density in there? And so on and so forth. If at one point you need to pick between putting some of your resources on proper maintenance and disinfecting protocol of high touch areas or maintaining your fitness room, you probably want to deal with what's really more important, which is to ensure the safety and security of your community. Keep in mind that at the end of the day, condominium corporations, and we can't stress that enough, condo corporations are responsible to take reasonable steps to ensure the reasonable safety of the occupants, of anybody on the premises. And so ask yourself these questions before you sort of fall in the trap of really wanting to reopen your amenities just because you need or feel you want to reopen them, or just because the owners are pushing you to reopen them. And also keep in mind that I was making a joke about returning to Woodstock, but keep in mind that we may be actually returning to, I hate the expression, but a new normal. So reopening the corporation may not necessarily mean returning to what you had before. It may mean returning to something a bit different. And the panel today will focus on that, hopefully. I should have changed the slide here, but I can't do anything. This is the slide that we just covered now. I'm going to turn to you, Jason, now, if I could. And I've brought you to the beginning of to the front of the queue, Jason, to give you a bit more time. And you have two topics that are really of interest to me, anyways, today. One is your famous reopening amenities risk assessment, and you're going to walk us through a tool that you've developed, which is fantastic. And you're also going to have to sadly sort of remind us of fire safety. I mean, I think we're facing an increase in fatalities. Let me unmute you if I can. And maybe you can walk us through these two topics, Jason.
Yeah, listen, as a condominium corporation, it's also a workplace. So under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, we have a requirement as a condo corporation to conduct risk assessments for any tasks or jobs that our staff would do within our workplace. And that applies to supervisors as well. So that's really important when we take a look at addressing the hazards within the workplace for the employees. When addressing the hazards with amenities or reopening or re-engaging amenities, my recommendation is that you follow that same kind of methodology or same procedure. For the simple reason is it's accepted across the province of Ontario, the principles are guided, internationally accepted, and it works. So when I suggest a risk assessment, it allows you to go into that room and look at it almost as what's the function of this room. So let's use a gym, for example. The gym has a function for people to go in and work out. Within 2 minutes of people working out, they're going to be breathing heavy. The confined space will also allow the machines. You've typically got machines packed into these rooms so that you can get more people in there to more use them. So you're going to have to look at it through the lens of a risk assessment to both staff going in there to clean these areas or service or inspect or patrol these areas, but you're also going to have to look at it through the lens of the residents and the acceptable risk and have a methodology that's proven that your condo corp or workplace can develop that. So here's some examples. Bear with me.
I went back one slide. I think these are the examples you're looking for.
Yeah, so conduct a hazard assessment for each. So with respect to the employees, there's some tips you can do. Stagger employee start times, lunch and breaks. You got to notify the service providers of your condo of your new workplace rules and guidelines. And where are you getting those rules and guidelines from? You're getting them from that risk assessment. In that risk assessment, you're going to identify the PPE required for those employees. Now that you've identified that, which we all know what they are, we've got to provide our employees written direction on how to use that and access that PPE. And in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, we've got to post that even. So I think you can also have staff acknowledge it. But getting back to the risk assessment in the amenities, there is a wonderful hierarchy of controls that has been internationally accepted, and I suggest you apply them through the lens when you're looking at opening up these amenities. So PPE has historically been looked at as the most basic form. It's less effective of providing protection.
Jason, what's the PPE?
Personal protective equipment, sorry.
Okay, good, thanks.
So it's a solution that is really simple. Throw a mask and go to work, or throw a mask on everybody and have them return back to that amenity room. And that's proven that it's not the most acceptable way of doing this. So if you are going to open an amenity, your probably most effective opportunity is to ensure that social distancing maintains every 6 feet. So if you've got 4 machines in your gym, you could be reducing your gym down to 2 now, or 2 machines. Then you've got considerations for additional cleaning. Then you have considerations for additional patrols. Then you have considerations to make sure those staff are prepared to do those things, and you have those resources and finances to do it. So as an example, we had one condo board look at an additional $5,000 to $6,000 to $7,000 additional fees just considering opening up 2 amenities within their building. And those 2 amenities would only service 2 people at a time. So they started looking at, was that risk and that hazard assessment effective? Absolutely. They're making the decision based on facts through the lens of internationally accepted principles, and they're able to articulate why they're not opening those amenities.
Right. Can you help me sort of understand the other ones, like administrative control, engineering control? What is that?
Yeah, there's a couple of different types of controls. So as an example, some of the controls you can eliminate or remove the hazard. You can substitute a hazard, which means replacing it with something else. But some of the engineering controls is isolate people from that hazard or modify a piece of equipment to make sure that there's no more concerns in there. So there are almost levels that you can address, eliminate, substitute, implement engineering controls or structural changes.
Right.
And then there's policy and procedure and administrative changes that you can take on.
And those could be the rules that the corporations have, or the scheduling, or the policy they'd put in place, no more than X person per at the time in the gym. Okay, that makes sense. Can I show your chart?
Absolutely.
Okay, let me put it on and maybe walk us through this. How would you, and we're going to post that on Condo Advisor as well, but walk me through this one.
Please do. So as an example, if I'm a condo corporation, I should have one of these or 2 or 3 of these filled out for every employee or person that I have in my workplace. And I should be reviewing, what do they have to do in their job? What are the health or safety hazards associated with each step of that job? And what type of controls are required to address those health and safety hazards? And again, those controls are based on that hierarchy of items you can choose from. So really, risk is that multiplication of consequence, probability, and frequency, and you can develop a risk score. I'm more than happy to share the risk profile document with you as well so that you can get it up on the website that further explains how to use this. But as an example, you can actually rank which job your superintendent does that has the highest health and safety hazards. And that's where you would focus on addressing those controls. For example, they have to change these lights. In order to change these lights, they have to bend down and pick up a bulb. They have to get on a 7-foot ladder. They change it, and then they come down off that ladder. What are the health and safety concerns? They're now working at heights, and they're potentially bending over and picking up items. I can now clearly address those 2 items with either engineering controls, policies and procedures, or personal protective equipment, and document that.
Yeah, and let me jump in, because when I was looking at your chart, this chart initially, I thought that it could easily be adapted rather than to focus on a job or on a role. You could almost use it by focusing on a service provided or on an amenity that's being reopened. And you could ask yourself, well, for the gym, for instance, or going to the garbage room, or using the concierge or the valet parking. so if you look at the service or the amenity as opposed to a step job, you could almost use it, I think, the same way. And you'd ask yourself, okay, what would be the health and safety hazards that could be associated with this, with using the pool, using the sauna, whatever it is? And you could probably use it that way, I think, could you not?
100%, and that's what we're suggesting is because this is a proven model accepted throughout the province and throughout internationally, you can use this to actually review some of your risks within your amenities. Absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, let me move you to the next topic so we don't run out of time. Sad stats here.
Yeah, listen, these are really tragic numbers. And quite simply, we're seeing a large fire fatality increase over the province of Ontario. So right off the bat, since January 1st of this year, we've had 51 fire fatalities in Ontario. In March alone, we had 17 Ontarians die from fire. And these are unacceptable numbers. That's a 65% increase from this time last year. So the Ontario Fire Marshal's offices and Toronto and the GTA Fire Services are up and running. They are working and supporting the communities, but the number one cause remains unattended cooking. We're seeing more and more people cooking who are not used to cooking, and they're leaving those cooking unattended. So if there's a message to communicate to your community, definitely please focus on that one. In fact, we've even gone virtually. I'm holding a session at 7 o'clock tonight. We're booked solid. We're actually delivering resident sessions virtually. We're holding staff training sessions for condo staff virtually. So we're seeing a shift. Still, that demand is there for the code compliance. It's now going virtual. So please, I encourage you to communicate that to your residents.
Okay. And maybe let me turn to David or Graham. Any questions from the floor that are relevant to this section before we let Jason go?
Yeah. So there's one question that's come up a few times in this context and in others, but I think here's a good place to talk about it. What about making owners sign a waiver? You want to open up an amenity with or without whatever protections the corporation decides, and you have owners sign a waiver to basically sign away any liability. Is that a good idea, and is that something that any of us would advise?
I'm not a legal expert, but anytime I'm in a position to make you sign a waiver to go into the gym and work out or to use a movie theater room, I'm probably doing that because I know that it shouldn't be open. Or I have some factors that would lead me to believe that maybe I'm having second thoughts. So that's my advice.
I wonder if one of the legal minds wants to jump in. I don't know, Denise or Josh, or if not, I'm going to tackle it maybe. I don't know.
Well, I was going to say I agree with Jason completely. Putting out that waiver is suggesting that there's something that you're not doing. And I think if you're fully confident that the facilities are properly maintained and safe, then there shouldn't be the need for the waiver.
Right.
Waiver. Rod, I'll jump in on that too and just say that, waivers aren't bulletproof in any event. Yeah. So even if someone is signing a waiver, it doesn't necessarily shield the corporation from liability. So I wouldn't rely on that as justification to start opening things up when maybe they really shouldn't be. Right.
I was going to say exactly that. They're of limited value. Graham, do you want to jump in?
Yeah. If we're just all dogpiling on, I was going to say my 2 cents are that, if the consideration here is should we get a waiver because this is risky, maybe the question to be asking is should you be opening this amenity right now? Right.
Okay, so Jason, I think I'm going to switch topics now, if it's okay with you, and I'm going to turn to our in-house engineer. I'm going to go to Justin. I think we sort of covered already, Justin, the orders in council. I don't know if you have anything to add to that before you tackle your main topic.
No, not much there.
Okay, so you want to tackle the prompt payment legislation, and folks at home, keep in mind that the topic today, the main direction is returning to normal, reopening business, right? And so what does that mean when we finally are able to start to get work being done at the corporation? So take it home, Justin.
Yeah, and this year was going to be hard for running construction projects and ensuring everybody adhered to the new prompt payment legislation without COVID. But now that people are locked up and they're not meeting as much, and everybody's afraid to touch the mail, and managers are extra busy because everybody's at home and might miss an invoice, or because work might not be able to get inspected, this is going to become more important than ever.
Oh, we lost you there, Jay. Oh, okay, you're back on.
All right. Condos are going to have a little bit harder time paying their bills this year. And this year is the year that the government of Ontario has provided an extra tool to contractors to ensure that money gets in their pockets and gets in their pockets quickly. So the Construction Lien Act from 1983 was amended in 2018 and 2019 with two major changes. One was the modification of the holdback provisions. There's a whole bunch in there, but simply put, it went from 45 to 60 days. And then there was the introduction of a massive prompt payment regime. And that's what I'm going to talk about on the here today. Essentially, it provided a way for contractors to ensure all owners are paying their bills in a timely manner. And if they intend to dispute them, there's a mechanism to do so. So in a standard pure form CCDC contract, Rod put up the slide there. There used to be an invoice that went from the contractor to an engineer or a consultant for evaluation. If this wasn't a CCDC contract or a standard contract, it might go to a property manager for evaluation. That evaluator would typically have about 10 days to evaluate the appropriateness of that invoice and then certify it for payment. After that certification goes out, the owner has 20 days to pay. That's how it was supposed to work on paper. But we all know that condo work is a little different. So I have another slide there, Ron.
Yeah.
And so it's part of a bigger point here. But to say that condo work is a little different says that, well, the contractor would send the invoice to the engineer or consultant. It would be evaluated within 10 days. Then that evaluation certificate of payment would go over to the property manager. And the property manager, although they have to pay that bill within 20 days, it might not get to the board for a month. The board might be snowbirds and might not do meetings for 4 months. So it might take a long time to have that check. The board might look to reevaluate whether this invoice should be paid or not, regardless of what their consultant said. So we typically see 20, 60, 90-day payment on construction projects. And that delay is what the changes to the legislation were designed to do. There's one more slide here, Rod. So this is how the Act changed. The Act now says, and this applies to every construction project started after October of last year, whenever a proper invoice is sent to an owner, there is a 28-day clock that starts from the day that proper invoice is sent. If the owner does not advise the contractor that they dispute that invoice within 14 days, the owner has to pay that invoice, non-disputed. If the invoice is not paid at 28 days, a process now starts called adjudication, which is a new something like the CAT. It's a regulatory authority that's been put aside to help deal with these disputes. That will, within 7 days of that 28-day milestone, force everybody into a process of potential, a pseudo-legal process to sort out where payment is. So this affects all construction projects. If you can't pay the bill within 28 days, the owner has to notify the contractor within 14. Why would you notify the contractor that you're not paying it? What if you disagree with the value of the invoice and the contractor is not willing to change it? That's a reason to notify them not to pay. If there's a setback off a previous invoice that was over certified, that might be a reason not to pay. If you have a bunch of board members in self-isolation or quarantine and nobody's going to be able to sign the check, you should let them know that you can't pay it. So how do you do this? There's a form 1.1 that's available on ontarioconstructionforms.ca that is an official form that needs to be put out. It needs to say how much you're not paying and why. And you need to file this with the contractor by the 14th day. So simply put, if you don't pay your bill on time, or if you don't dispute it, the contractor can now bring everybody to the pseudo tribunal called adjudication. And adjudication is a body of independent adjudicators that are set to evaluate the value of changes, the extras on invoices, and the costs associated with them. And these decisions are designed to happen fast and act like court orders. So they'll have a lot of meat behind them. I went to some mock adjudications. I've seen what this is going to look like. It looks like a big, red, hairy mess that you don't want to be part of. It's best to be on top of it and make sure your paperworks are done early on. There's obviously some issues associated with this. There's no room if you have a project that has a consultant in here for consultant review. The second the proper invoice lands on the owner's desk, whether it was sent to the consultant or not, that 14-day clock, the 28-day clock starts. You also cannot put in a contract that the invoice has to be certified by a consultant or an engineer or a property manager. Those terms are null and void. Checks are gonna have to be issued fast. If boards aren't meeting and not signing checks, they'll put themselves at risk of not being in compliance with the new act.
Okay. I got two questions for you before I let you go. One question is, and you gotta answer in rapid succession here. Can we make a payment with prejudice? Say, well, I'm going to give you the money. We'll sort it out later as to whether or not the quality of the work and whether or not it meets the requirements and so on.
Absolutely. If let's say you don't want to pay it, but you went to 15 days and you forgot to put the notice in, pay the invoice. These things can always be set off on the following invoice. There's no reason, there's nothing to suggest that isn't available. You can dispute the next invoice and use that invoice to set off that previous payment.
Sure. Other question, what does this process apply to? Who does it apply to? Like all contractors, or are we talking about construction kind of contractors, or how does that work?
It applies to all construction projects in the same way that the lien provisions and statutory holdback applies to all construction.
So not to the landscapist, if I'm, but really we're talking about construction work. Okay.
That's right.
Okay, well, you pretty much stayed within your time, Justin, but you used it all on this topic. So unfortunately, you'll have to come back next week for the constructing projects while social distancing. That's going to be next week. Thanks so much, Justin. We're going to now go and change topics. We're going to go into the financial mystery chapter or portion of the presentation today of the webinar. And Brian Antman is going to deal with most of the financial elements, but somebody I forgot to introduce at the very beginning, and I apologize for that, is we have online with us Rob Detta Cully, and he is an energy consultant. I was going to call him an energy expert, but he says, yeah, let's go for consultant first. I guess an expert's more expensive, I don't know. And so he's with Crossbridge. So Rob, I'm going to turn to you in a minute, but to you now, Brian, what does the future look like? What's new ways of doing business? And something that came to mind to me was, how do we deal with maybe electronic payments? Maybe that's the way of the future to preserve social distancing and so on. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of discussions over the last 8 weeks about what the landscape's going to look like coming out of this. And I think the work environment is going to be much different moving forward. Up until now, management companies have had pretty much manual systems, typical system where invoices come in through the mail, they're processed, checks are written manually, they're sent out to the sites for signature, brought back and put back in the mail for delivery to the different vendors. And I think we're going to see an increase, at least I'm hoping, in some of the online payment systems and processing systems that are out there. I've even heard companies are not accepting checks right now for condo fees, that they're only accepting pre-authorized payments. And again, some vendors aren't accepting checks for payment of their invoices. So the landscape, I think, is going to be much different going forward.
Stop saying landscape, Brian. Stop using that word.
Sorry. The environment, there you go. So one of the things you have to remember, though, is that these new processes that are out there still have to maintain proper internal controls. Any property management company that is working in the condo environment today, most of them have a very strong system of internal controls. And without any sort of particular order, I've just made a list of some of the things that you should see in the current environment that should be carried forward moving forward. So one of them is segregation of duties, where certain duties are segregated from different individuals in a property management company. That might be where the property manager issues a PO, invoices are processed by a different person, and payments are also processed by a different person. The whole idea is that there's no collusion amongst any of those individuals. We all know that one of the good controls is to ensure that directors have the ability to at least sign checks. Typically what happens is one director signs a check and the property manager might be the other signatory on payment. The lien process has to be maintained so that all accounts receivable are collected. Financial statements should be produced monthly, reviewed and approved by the board of directors. Best practices suggest that cash should not be accepted for any payments at any level within a condo. And lastly, the accounts payable function and the accounts receivable function should be segregated also to ensure that there's no collusion. Like I said, the current process, at least in my mind, is very labor intensive, it's time consuming, and consumes a lot of space within any office for invoices, both paid and unpaid, and all of the paperwork that we do have. There are companies out there that do offer automated services. They do have systems that all the internal controls are maintained. The approval processes are just automated. So basically what happens is a vendor like myself performs a service. I would email my invoice into the management company. That would get recorded and processed accurately, recorded into a standard account. Payments would be authorized. There may be electronic signatures. There may be manual checks still. Typically, if, like in my office, what we're doing is we used to issue all checks manually. What we're doing now is we've set up a pre-authorized payment process where one of the partners has to approve a payment before the payment is actually made.
Okay.
One of the other things that is really a consideration is what's the cost of these services? And in looking at them, there's two sides of the coin really. They are not cheap. That's probably why some of the management companies have been reluctant to implement them. But I think with the COVID-19 environment, there's hopefully going to be a big push to implement these services. In my mind, they do save a lot of time, although the implementation phase can be quite time consuming. The cost is typically based on a flat fee or perhaps on the number of transactions by each corporation. The savings, well, you're going to save a lot of paper that you're not going through, storage costs, courier costs, things like that. You can use this system either conventionally as it's built with electronic signatures. I have seen some companies who are using it still maintain manual checks. That would be a little bit more time consuming and costly because of the issuance of manual checks. So that's really where I see the process going in the future. I think one of the things we wanted to just speak about related to the new environment is electronic payments. And I think Denise was going to just speak to some of the things that she's seeing in the current environment right now.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Rod, I was going to mention what we're seeing a lot of activity, you know, on our lien collections. Normally we get owners coming in with post-dated checks or money orders of bank drafts, certified checks, but now it's all electronic transfers, which is a good thing because we're getting paid quickly and condominium corporations are getting their money right away. So a lot more electronic transfers.
Okay. Anything else, Brian, before I turn to our energy consultant?
I just wanted to mention a couple things about going forward and budgets. I mean, I know we were going to try and get to this last week, but we ran out of time. So I thought I'd just spend a couple minutes on talking about perhaps, you know, we've been talking about all of these issues related to COVID-19. And, you know, it's my belief that going forward, protocols and procedures are going to be in place for a long time, that the way businesses are operating is going to be very different than we've seen in the past. And I think owners, property managers, and directors have to be prepared for this. In most cases, there may be higher operating costs for condos, and also I think that cash flows are going to be significantly affected. Why do I say that? Well, first of all, directors have the obligation, as we all know, to maintain the assets and common elements of the corporation. But there will be, going forward, stricter government controls and regulations. We have to maintain proper health and safety measures. All of these things may come with a higher cost. Things like cleaning, security, social distancing has to be implemented. For example, there's, you know, we see in some of the condos now they've installed screens in the security desks and other measures to ensure that the security staff is kept safe. There may be more stringent rules like we talked about with respect to amenities and social distancing. With more people around condos, there may be more repairs and maintenance because people are in the buildings longer. Another factor is really cash flow. And the reason I say that is because although we all know that there is a lien process in place, you may see that cash receipts are affected, and it may take a long period of time for the corporations to collect those receivables, but they still have to operate. So there may be some cash flow implications related to the operations of condos. So I think people just have to, you know, look at different areas within their budgets, understand that the costs have to be paid, and everybody's in the same environment, and we're all working to ensure health and safety.
Okay, well, let me jump in. That's a perfect segue to loop Rob in, actually. Speaking of some savings and some additional costs, I'll turn to you now, Rob. I'll unmute you. I think I've heard that very recently Ontario has extended the time of use hydro rates. And quite frankly, I've never really fully understood any of these different sort of pricing regimes, and maybe you can walk us through this. And what is this extension we're talking about? What does that mean?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'd love to join this esteemed group because I sometimes feel more like a lawyer looking at some of these things than an energy manager sometimes. There's three main ways that condominiums are charged for electricity, and we're just talking about electricity right now. The first one being time of use. That's what most single-family homes, I'll say all single-family homes are charged. That's kind of the typical on peak. There's a rate to that. Mid peak, there's a different rate, and then on peak, there's a certain rate to that. So that's how most single-family homes are charged, and I'd say about half of the condo corporations in Ontario are charged that way. There's two more. One other one called hourly, which has an hourly piece to it, and also something called global adjustment. That's probably another 40%.
Is that sort of what, when we talk about the condo corps being on a commercial sort of rating kind of thing?
Exactly, yeah. And that's where you get all the acronyms thrown around. HOEP, which is an hourly price, and global adjustment is the big one,
Right.
referred to as GA, yeah.
And there was a third method of pricing.
Yeah, there's a third one called the regulated price plan. You could call that the old method before time of use came to condominiums. That's where you had two tiers. You got a certain amount of electricity you could use per suite at a cheaper rate. When you went above that, then it got a little more expensive.
Sure. And so how does that play into this extension? What has been extended and until when?
Yeah, I've got, I guess, the bearer of some good news, because this does help with some of the cash flow. This was first announced at the end of March, so it's already been in place for 45 days, and it's been extended to the end of May 31st. And what happened in March 24th was that it said if you're being charged on time of use, so this doesn't fit with all condominiums. If you are charged time of use, then you are being charged for the lowest or the off-peak rate. So that was 10.1 cents. And what that means then is, for a condominium, is that you're getting charged that 10.1 regardless of when you're using your electricity. So it fits nicely just because there's more people home during the day.
Right, right. Okay. Anything else before I switch gears?
There's two more things I'd say that kind of caught up. The condos that weren't billed on time of use always felt that, hey, they missed out. There's two things recently announced that are essentially, I'd say, kind of catching up to the discount that the time of use condos had already had.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks so much. Switching gears. Thanks for coming, Rob. At the last minute, you came to bat. Thank you so much. We're going to now switch topics, and we are going to turn the microphone to Denise. And so, Denise, earlier on today, Graham spoke about the orders in council and the various extensions and this and that. And maybe how does that sort of tie into many corporations attempting to schedule some of their AGMs, and is there like some concerns with respect to that?
Well, yeah, I'm not going to get into how do orders in council work, because it appears that all of us couldn't figure it out. You know, we don't know when this emergency period will end, but we do know you can postpone your AGMs. However, there are corporations that still want to hold their AGMs, and they want to do it virtually, because now you can do it virtually and you can use electronic voting. But there is a risk, and the risk is, what happens if you call your meeting now and all of a sudden the emergency order ends? Do we think it's going to happen? Yes, maybe, I don't know. Could happen 2 weeks from now. So you've called your meeting, and then what happens? Well, according to the order, the order in council, you cannot hold your virtual meeting outside of that emergency period. So now you've got a meeting that you called, and you can't hold a virtual meeting because you don't have a virtual meeting bylaw, and you're not in the emergency period, nor can you do electronic voting. So we talk about converting your meeting. So what you may have to do is convert your meeting to an in-person meeting. But you've already sent out your notice with your virtual meeting, and you've already started your electronic voting. So it may be different for those corporations that have an electronic voting bylaw. They may be in a better shape because they can still use all the electronic votes that started during the emergency, but they can't continue with the virtual meeting. And for those that don't have an electronic voting bylaw, you're going to have to call your in-person meeting. You're going to start collecting proxies again. So we're back to proxies or in-person ballots. Again, you know, I have to stress the importance of, you know, if you don't need to call your AGM, then maybe you shouldn't. But if you are going to call it, just keep in mind you're going to need legal advice, because if the emergency period ends, you're going to need to figure out how to transition to the in-person meeting. Of course, it would be ideal if everyone had the virtual meeting and electronic voting bylaw, but we don't have that. Most corporations don't have that at all. Some have the electronic voting bylaw only, but that doesn't give you the ability to do a virtual meeting. even after, if we get past this and we go into the period in which the emergency period ends and you're in that transition, you could still have a virtual information meeting. So you'll go ahead and you'll have the virtual platform, but you can't do motions on it. You can't do voting. You don't count those who've registered for the virtual meeting as being present because you don't have a virtual meeting bylaw.
Right. So I think what I take away from this is the only way you will be able, as of now, you'll be able to continue to hold e-meetings and to continue to have e-voting is if you pass a bylaw. And so now may be the time to pass that bylaw simply because there's a bit of a limited runway under the order in council, and we're not sure how the transition will flow after that. So adopting a bylaw now may allow you to continue to be able to hold your meetings electronically and so on. And the second thing that I take away from this is that the issue we have is that the orders in council seem to be extended always by 14 days. And the issue is that when we call a meeting, we have to give 35 days notice. So we're sort of throwing the ball out of sight, and we're not sure what the playing field will look like when we get there. Anything else, Denise, before I move on?
No, but I see questions coming in. There's so many questions on meeting, like requisition meetings. Yes, you have to hold your requisition meeting. If you've lost a quorum of the board, yes, you have to call your meeting. We're dealing just now with the AGMs, which you can postpone according to the order.
That's very good point. So the only meeting that can be postponed now are AGMs, and in fact AGMs that were scheduled to take place during this emergency period. If your AGM was already late on March 17th, you're not covered by the order in council. And if it's a requisition meeting, a turnover meeting, a loss of quorum meeting, those have to proceed, as was explained last week by Graham. Okay, switching topics, let's talk about enforcing rules. And I think, Josh, you're the one dealing with this. And what I have in mind is the very difficult balancing act between enforcing and being maybe more flexible. And how do we manage that? We've been telling people until recently, well, to crack the whip, but do understand that we're in a very specific situation right now. But we do have an obligation to enforce our rules. So how do we negotiate this?
Yeah, absolutely, Rod. I mean, the obligation to enforce is still there. The same obligation is there. The only difference is the circumstances. So these have changed during COVID-19. We have lots of people practicing physical distancing, remaining inside their units. So we're bound to have additional nuisance-related issues in the condo setting. But I think the question is, during this situation when we're dealing with COVID-19, what is unreasonable or excessive noise? And has that maybe changed a little bit, given that everyone's circumstances have changed? People don't have childcare, and there's likely a lot more children living at home, and people are working remotely. So all of these things need to be taken into account in terms of how corporation is enforcing and dealing with all of these issues. So I think it's reasonable to expect a greater degree of nuisance right now, and it's probably slightly escalated the sort of tolerance level that neighbors need to expect before we start taking those enforcement steps, because we're just dealing with the perfect storm right now with all of these additional people living inside the units and dealing with different challenges. So I think what we need to do is sort of pivot a little bit. We still need to be sending warning letters from management. We still need to be sending enforcement letters from legal counsel. But I think we need to have a little bit more of a focus on really trying to talk to the person complaining, talk to the person making the noise, and of course, document everything, follow things up in writing. But let's place a little more emphasis on that first sort of mediated step of actually trying to talk to someone and trying to get somewhere without having to escalate matters to, especially to legal counsel. Nobody wants to receive a letter from a lawyer, especially right now. So it's about trying to get that balance. Of course, if talking to someone isn't getting anywhere, then absolutely escalate those steps. We have to do it. that statutory obligation for a condo corp to enforce is still there. But let's just take into account the sort of shifted circumstances that we're dealing with right now.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. In about 30 seconds, my two managers extraordinaire, what are the crises this week?
Well, yeah, nuisance and noise and complaints really is a big one. Josh touched on most of it, and it really boils down to everyone has different needs right now during the pandemic. People are dealing with their children, working from home, like he said. Everyone just needs to be respectful of their neighbors and everyone's needs, and let's try and work together to come up with solutions so that everyone can get through this pandemic.
Okay, Catherine.
It's a mediative approach is really what it boils down. That's what Josh is speaking about. That's what Sandy is talking about. And what has always been one of the challenges in enforcing rules and doing what is reasonable in condo land is that your house in the field in the middle of nowhere happens to be on top of, beside, or underneath someone else's. Home is their castle. And what I say when I mean that is that we are often not understanding of what the other person's needs are. That's why we come into conflict. And the sooner we can have people understand what those competing needs are, those competing values are, the sooner we can come to, most often, an agreement that will work for both parties. What Josh and Sandy have touched upon is the fact that, more people than ever are struggling with mental health issues. CAMH has reported that there has been a 750% increase in calls, touches, and other, means of reaching out for support. Folks are not getting out, and people are living in closer quarters. So trying to find ways where both people can be satisfied and sacrifice a little will get us the furthest as we try to all live together safe at home.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. So we're at a time. I'm going to do like I do every week. I'm going to go around the table. I'm going to thank our speakers for having shared their evening with us. And you only have 15 seconds each to say goodbye because we're out of time. Brian Antman from Adams Miles LLP, thank you so very much for your insight. Any parting words? Oh, you're all muted. Yeah, that's a problem.
Yes, that is a problem.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone. Nothing really to say. Look forward to next week.
Wonderful. So we're having a next week, folks. You heard it here first. Turning to you, Sandy Foles from Wilson Blanchard Management. Thank you so much. Words of wisdom before we go.
Be kind, put yourself in your neighbor's shoes. Everyone's got different struggles right now. Stay safe.
Thank you so much. Catherine Gao, a Mary Poppins saying before we go?
Well, my typical one is keep calm, wash your hands, and sanitize your cell phone. But the other theme, especially tonight, had to do with communication. The way forward is uncertain, but if we talk to each other about what the challenges are in terms of opening up all of the amenities, which everybody would like, people won't like it, but they will understand it. And they will also understand when we are able to open them. And I also want to remind folks, it has been communicated before, having to go backwards as opposed to continuing forward with some of the restrictions, but in a positive way, will be better received. So be more conservative rather than more open, at least in the shorter term. It'll keep us all healthier, and I think it'll be better understood by your whole community.
Okay. That was the longest 15 seconds I've heard, Mary. I'm going to
take
turn that
advantage
to
always.
Denise Lash from Lash Condo Law, also speaking on behalf of the Community Association Institute of Canada.
Mine's much shorter. Yes. I was going to just say, embrace technology. It's the new way.
Wonderful. And moving on now to Graham McPherson, Gowling WLG.
Yeah, so thank you everybody for tuning in tonight. Keep doing exactly what you're doing, that is staying informed, staying safe, and staying 6 feet away.
Very good. You sound like you're 6 feet away at least right now.
I'm just practicing social
Lean in.
distancing. We don't know that if this travels through the internet. Please, I am just joking.
David Plotkin from Gowling WLG.
Thank you. Yeah, just check in on your neighbors, check in on your loved ones. This has been a long journey for all of us, and physical distancing does not necessarily mean social distancing, and they've replaced that word for a reason.
Yes, absolutely. Josh Milgram from Lash Condo Law, parting words.
Thanks, Rod. Thanks, everyone. One more point on nuisance issues. We actually need to investigate nuisances. So don't just take someone's word for it that there's actually a noise complaint or an odor issue or something like that. Make sure you're investigating, obviously in a physically distant type of way, but don't start sending off legal letters without actually having investigated something.
Very good. Thank you so much. Jason Reed from National Life Safety Group. People are asking you to return next week to talk about fire safety again and how that interplays with social distancing. So you got a gig next week there, buddy. Parting words of wisdom?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always a big proponent on documentation. And as discussed before, the fire code and now the Occupational Health and Safety Act requires the building owner or the corporation to prove due diligence. So documentation is key. Have a great week.
Okay. Thanks so much for being with us. Justin Tudor from Keller Engineering. Words of wisdom before we go. Oh, there it is.
The world's on fire.
And special thanks to Rob Detacoli for your presentation tonight. Thank you so much. It's very appreciated. Thanks.
You're welcome. I'm going to have, I think it's a publicly viewable summary on the all three pricing regimes and just what is in place during this COVID stuff.
And you're going to post that where?
On the Crossbridge blog. I think it's publicly viewable.
I think so too. If not, it's going to be now. Thank you so very much. Okay, well, everybody, that's it for us. Thanks for tuning in. I know that your time is precious, so we don't take that for granted. Again, we're preparing for next week. We need topics, we need suggestions. So send your questions, send your topics. So next week on Wednesday, May 13th, 5 o'clock, same channel, same time, same people. The information will be posted on condoadvisor.ca. You'll need to register again so we know who shows up. And to register, you need to visit Condo Advisor. And then there's a tab, webinar tab. You click on that. And for the next few days, it's going to be a very skeletal kind of agenda because I haven't prepared it yet. But this is your time your chance to give us topics, suggestions, questions you have. And that's how you register for the AGM next week. Not the AGM. Did I just say that?
That was a Freudian slip.
There it is. So this is where you will get to see our webinar next week. Thank you again, everybody, all the speakers and people at home. Stay safe, be good with one another, and see you next week. Take care. Good night.
Bye-bye.